The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse. My mother would have known that she'd been deceived.
Something Diana wrote was never meant to stay buried. Prince William has now seen it, and what it contains has left Camilla with no answer. A documented record Diana created deliberately, concealing specific knowledge in a way nobody in the palace anticipated surviving. The real story isn't what the letter says on its surface. It's what it proves Diana knew, recorded, and quietly protected. Because if that's true, every carefully managed version of events since 1997 collapses. So what exactly did Diana write? And why does it matter so much right now? Here is what actually happened. In the weeks following Princess Diana's death in August 1997, her estate, valued at approximately $35.6 million, with $21.3 million remaining after taxes, entered probate. Standard procedure. Except that somewhere inside that process, a second document existed alongside the formal will. A letter of wishes. Diana had written it herself, deliberately, detailing exactly where she wanted her jewelry to go, how her personal belongings should be divided, and what she intended for the 17 godchildren she had chosen throughout her life. She was specific. She wrote it with the full expectation it would be honored. It wasn't disclosed. Not to everyone who should have known. And here is the part that genuinely shocked the people closest to this situation. Family members only learned the letter of wishes existed at all because of entirely unrelated court proceedings. The outrage was real. The letter of wishes carried a specific legal vulnerability. Unlike a formally executed will, it had no binding enforceability. Diana's executors, her mother and her sister, contested elements of the estate in probate court, and when the letter of wishes came under scrutiny, it could not hold. What Diana had written down, what she had quietly and deliberately recorded as her final intentions for the people she loved, was not legally sufficient to compel anyone to act on it. So the question becomes, what did Diana actually put in that letter? What were those specific wishes the legal process ultimately could not protect? That is where the real story lives. Not in any invented confrontation, but in the documented contents of a genuine document that Diana wrote, that was suppressed long enough to cause serious ruptures when it finally surfaced, and that carries implications for how her estate was managed, how her sons were treated, and what she actually intended versus what was done in her name. Because the contents of that letter of wishes, once you go through them, tell you something very specific about what Diana knew, what she wanted protected, and why certain people in this story had every reason to hope it stayed buried. Diana split figure equally between William and Harry, held in trust. Not weighted toward the elder son, equal. That choice alone tells you something about how she saw them, not as heir and spare, but as two sons with identical claim on what she had built. But Diana did not stop at the money. The letter of wishes went further, into territory that cannot be reduced to a financial figure. No jewelry, her personal belongings. Diana directed that all of her jewelry and 3/4 of her personal effects pass directly to William and Harry. The remaining quarter she designated for her 17 godchildren. That is a woman sitting down, counting her godchildren, and quietly making sure each one was written into something she considered permanent. Here is where the document becomes genuinely uncomfortable for certain people. Diana apparently did not specify fast enough, because the executors of her estate moved to contest the will in probate court almost immediately, citing what they called a variance. The letter of wishes, for all its specificity, lacked the legal enforceability of the formal will. It could be noted, it could not be compelled. There was also one more clause that rarely gets the attention it deserves. William and Harry would not receive their inheritance at 25, the standard threshold. They would wait until 30. This delay was structural, not punitive, but it meant that for years, the two people Diana had written this document to protect had no direct access to what she had left them. Which raises the question that actually matters. If the contents were this clear and specific, why did it take unrelated court proceedings for the family to even learn the letter existed? Sources suggest the letter of wishes was not withheld through clerical oversight or administrative delay. It went undisclosed for years. The two sons Diana had written it specifically to protect were navigating their grief, their public duties, their adolescence inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth, and the document their mother had prepared for them, in her own hand, was sitting somewhere they could not see it. You have to understand what that moment actually meant. Diana had been deliberate. She had named her sons, named her godchildren, laid out proportions, anticipated disputes. And yet the people she had named in that document were the last to know it existed. The legal reality explains how this was allowed to happen. The letter of wishes carried no enforceable weight in court. It could be referenced. It could not be compelled. When Diana's executors contested the will in probate, citing that variance, the letter offered no real defense. Whatever Diana had recorded in it, the formal legal architecture did not support it. Her intentions were documented. Her intentions were also, in a very precise legal sense, optional, which is where the complication sits that nobody has fully resolved. A document being unenforceable does not make it meaningless. It makes it dangerous in a different way. It means someone could know exactly what Diana wanted and still choose not to honor it with no legal consequence whatsoever. The letter becomes leverage without being law. That is precisely what makes the eventual discovery so significant. Because once William and Harry learned what that letter said, the question of who knew, and when, and why no one said anything became a question that pointed in a very specific direction. That direction has a name, and it is the name that Diana herself put on record as the source of everything she feared most. So why Camilla? That is the question sitting underneath all of this. Her name is the one that keeps surfacing whenever anyone tries to explain why Diana's wishes were treated as optional rather than sacred. That is not an accident. It is the result of something Diana herself built, carefully and deliberately, over years. The documented history between these two women is not tabloid invention. Diana spoke about Camilla in terms that were precise, specific, and deeply personal. Not jealousy or rivalry in any ordinary sense, but something closer to a recorded accusation. Diana used her platform, interviews, and her private letters to construct a version of events in which Camilla was not simply a rival, but an active participant in what Diana experienced as a systematic dismantling of her position inside that family. Now, the public hostility was real. By the early 1990s, Diana had stopped disguising it, and sources suggest she had reasons she considered entirely rational. That matters here because of what it means for the letter. When a document surfaces that Diana wrote and concealed and directed toward her sons, the person the architecture points toward is the person Diana had already identified on the record as the source of everything she feared most, which is what makes the next layer genuinely significant. Because Diana did not just express that fear privately, she put it on record in a way that was specific enough and public enough to be very difficult to walk back. The question is exactly what she said and how far she was willing to go. The record Diana actually left is more specific than most people realize. And this is the part that makes Camilla's position genuinely uncomfortable, because Diana did not leave her fears locked inside private correspondence alone. She broadcast them. The Panorama Interview, November 1995, 90 minutes, watched by 23 million people in Britain alone. Diana sat across from Martin Bashir and said, on camera, with full awareness of what she was doing, that there were 3 people in her marriage.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
She did not use Camilla's name in that sentence. She did not need to. The entire country understood exactly who she meant. But what actually mattered was not the famous line. It was everything surrounding it. Diana described feeling isolated inside the institution, monitored and deliberately undermined at moments she could not publicly prove. She used the word fears more than once. She talked about her future and the futures of her sons in language that carried a very specific weight. And when she spoke about who she trusted, Camilla was conspicuously absent from that list. Now, William watched that interview. He was 13. Sources close to the palace suggest it marked something permanent in how he understood his mother's position and, critically, the forces she believed were aligned against her. And years later, William said so publicly. In 2021, following the Dyson report into how Bashir obtained the interview, William released a statement describing the Panorama Interview as a program that had no legitimacy. He called it a source of significant harm. He was specific that it had contributed to his mother's paranoia and isolation. That statement is genuinely important because it cuts both ways. William was condemning the method. But what Diana actually said inside that interview? Documented fears, named dynamics, the recorded sense of being surrounded and outnumbered. None of that was retracted. The words stay on record. And Diana did not only speak on camera. Letters she wrote during the divorce period, confirmed through auction records and archived correspondence, show consistent language about feeling replaced and erased. The emotional architecture matches what she said publicly. Nothing contradicts it. So what Diana left on record is a documented fear expressed in multiple formats across multiple years, pointing in one consistent direction, which raises the question that the hidden letter, whenever it surfaces in these accounts, is always designed to answer. Not what Diana feared, everyone knows that, but what she knew, what she had written down, what she had deliberately hidden rather than disclosed. And the person who inherited both her son's and her Spencer name had more access to that answer than anyone has acknowledged publicly. And here is where the fabricated Althorp vault scene becomes genuinely interesting. William's actual relationship with Althorp and the Spencer legacy is documented, specific, and far more complicated than most people register. He has maintained a deliberate and careful distance from the Spencer family's public-facing institutional memory while remaining deeply connected to its private core. That tension is not accidental, it is completely intentional. Diana is buried at Althorp, on a small island in an ornamental lake called the Round Oval. The estate is controlled by Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, who opened it to visitors each summer for years and built a memorial museum around her. William has never publicly participated in that commercial memorialization, never endorsed it, never appeared there in any official capacity. Sources close to his circle suggest that distance is deliberate, that William drew a quiet but firm line between Diana's memory as something private and the Spencer estate's decision to monetize it. But here is what actually matters. William spent years consulting closely with senior palace officials about how Diana's legacy would be handled institutionally. He was involved in the 2017 Statue Commission at Kensington Palace, the 20th anniversary documentary, and the formal request to the BBC to investigate Martin Bashir's methods. That last one took 24 years. He pushed it. The question the fabricated letter always raises is who controls what Diana actually knew and recorded. And the answer to that question depends entirely on whether the current power arrangement inside the palace reflects what Diana intended, which is exactly what has quietly shifted since Charles became king. So here is the part that actually changes the equation. When Charles became king in September 2022, something shifted inside the palace that most casual observers completely missed. Camilla was not simply confirmed as queen consort. Within months, Charles quietly upgraded her title to queen, removing the consort designation entirely. That was not ceremonial. That was a deliberate repositioning of where power sits in this institution. And what does that mean for Diana's legacy? Because here is what the palace never wanted, sitting in the same sentence as Camilla's upgraded title. Diana, in her 1995 Panorama interview, specifically said there were people who did not want her to be queen. She named the anxiety. She put it on record. That statement now exists permanently alongside the reality that the woman Diana publicly named as her central fear has achieved precisely the status Diana said certain factions were determined to deny Diana herself. Now, is that a power shift? Or is it a palace myth that Camilla's position represents some kind of threat to Diana's documented legacy claims? The answer is both, and that is what makes it genuinely complicated. The confirmed facts are these. Camilla holds a title. Diana never did. William holds institutional leverage. Diana spent her final years trying to build from outside the structure. He is inside it, completely inside it, and he is using that position methodically, not loudly. But here is the complication that reopens everything. The upgrade from queen consort to queen was not widely telegraphed in advance. It arrived quietly. And in the language of this institution, decisions that arrive quietly are rarely finished decisions. They are openings, which means the question is not whether a power shift happened, something demonstrably shifted. The question is whether it is permanent or whether William's documented commitment to Diana's memory is itself a countermove still in progress. And that is where a very specific pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And that pattern is the real story. William discovers a letter. Camilla is left speechless, but we never learn what Camilla did next because every ending is engineered to seed the next installment. Sources suggest this is not accidental. None of it resolves because resolution kills the machine. The cliffhanger is the product. As long as the letter stays hidden, as long as the question stays open, the machine keeps running. And somewhere, it is already building the next episode. Diana's letter wasn't fiction. The suppressed real one shook this family for decades. William holds the moral inheritance. Camilla holds the title. But somewhere, an unread page still exists. The question isn't what Diana wrote, it's who's still hiding it.